Why don't they teach history, black history, especially the history of Antigua in schools?
History is being taught in our schools. It starts from grade 1 right up. Now the problem is, or the challenge is, what amount of it is being taught and what aspects of it is being taught. Now, one of the challenges teachers will tell you in teaching history or getting students to do history is that it's boring because it involves a lot of reading. Teaching history is one of the greatest challenges of teaching any subject because a teacher has to be deep in order to keep the interest of today's young people in history. All right? And so that is one of the challenges faced, and it's a very serious challenge. Remember, in school we do Caribbean history, it's not Antiguan history. So that in itself is a challenge at the CXC level. At the local level, at the elementary school, we do more of Antiguan history, but it is not a subject. It is not a discipline by itself. So maybe one of the things that could be instituted is to have history, Antiguan history, as a separate discipline at the primary school level and even higher. That could be one. For me, one of the things that I am thinking about is that, listen, I just had a relative, for example, who became a citizen of the United States, and I don't know if you experienced the same thing. Now, you have to answer some questions, right?
You have a book to study, yeah.
You have a book to study, and a lot of it is about American history. You have to pass that test to become a citizen of the United States.
Correct.
Does the same apply for Antigua? Do we have that where you have to know Antiguan history to become a citizen? I'm not sure about that, but I don't really theory.
I grew up in Antigua, going to primary school and secondary school, and no part of the education I received taught me anything about the history specifically of Antigua and Barbuda. Now, a nation that doesn't know its history is bound to repeat it. The truth of the matter is that we have to position our children first to learn who they are, and that means that you have to know who your mother, father, grandmother, and great-grandparents are, because that is going to encompass you. This is where your blood comes from. This is where your name comes from. I am glad that you asked the question about history, and I'm just going to give you what my experience is. I hated history at every level, even when I was in primary school, for the same reason you cited. I thought that it was boring. It was only when I homeschooled my children, I got an interest in history. Now, here's why I got an interest in it. Because I hated it, I didn't present it in any enthusiastic way to my children. As a matter of fact, I tried to skirt the issue because I hated it, I was weak in that particular area. And I found all kinds of excuse not to go into the History Channel. And then I experienced a series of songs on a resource when my children maybe were about 8 or 9, when we realized we had to be evaluated at the 3rd grade level, even though we were homeschooling outside of the public education system. And in it was some American history that they had to know. And so I had to find a quick way to acquire the content so that they would be able to do well in that regard. And long story short, there was a CD back in the day that had the history of America in periods in song. And we used to drive across the United States. My dad lived in Texas and I lived in New York, and it's a 40-hour direct drive from New York to Texas. And so we would just put in the DVD in the car and it would play the song of the specific period. It would have all the names, all the places, what happened. And that first time that I played that, I said, my goodness, this is amazing, because I find myself singing the song too as I was going along. And then we got intrigued because because they were only 8 and 9, and that was the level of that history content, we found ourselves asking the question, well, they mentioned this name. What happened to this person after that story? And when we looked for more songs, we found more songs, and then we found short videos about these people. And then we realized that, there's some places we could go. So in the United States, for example, there is the history of the American Indian, very distorted in the textbook. So we jumped in our car and we drove to a reservation. And we lived there for 3 days in a teepee tent and experienced the history that was being presented of those people there. And then the kid said, Dad, we should do this more often. And so we drove up to the northeastern United States from Maine, coming all the way down to Boston. And in the American system, in many states, there is a reenactment that happens of the actual history that happened hundreds of years before. Then I discovered a place named Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, the first organized city in the United States when the people came over on the Mayflower who lived there. That town exists as it existed when they came right now. And if you go there, you can live in the 1700s. How the people spoke, the buildings are all restored. A whole town. For years I have been proposing that we restore Betty's Hope to be the same kind of place, being the place that currently exists and has the most land. We should restore Betty's Hope as an estate that demonstrates that period in the history of Antigua and Barbuda. It would employ every aspect of Antiguans and Barbudans, from teachers to actors to musicians to tradespeople to farmers, everybody, including the administrative tasks. It may be a big jump to do it in 1 year or 2 years, but if we make this a 25-year plan and we redevelop Betty's Hope, we would attract people from all over the world, and then we would be able to get funding, and our children who are here and in the region would be able to fondly participate in history because they could live it. We are not living the history, and so it's boring when you have to just remember a set of dates that affect us. We have to be able to change how we interact and intersect with history, make it available in many formats. So nothing is wrong with singing history in the classroom. Make some calypso song and put them in the classroom. Make the child make the calypso song about the history so that we have this interactive environment. My wife had a workshop in Italy, and we decided to meet her after her workshop. And while we were in Italy, we decided to spend about 3 weeks there to learn that part of the European experience. We took the subway, and then we went to what is called the Colosseum. At that time, the Colosseum was under repair. And we got a ticket, and we validated that ticket every day. And for 1 week, every day, we showed up at the Colosseum, stood up in a long line. They gave us a recorded device, and we could punch numbers on that device, and depending on where we were in the Colosseum, it would give us the history of that part of the Colosseum. And we went there every day. We started in the basement of the Colosseum, and while we were there, they showed us, this is the movie of what used to happen down here. On level 2, there's a whole audio version of what used to happen there. And long story short, we went there for a week, and then we started to expand our boundaries. We went over to Vatican City, and we spent 3 days in the museums that we have there. If we could make history touchable, applicable, and interactive, And especially with our devices that we have today, there's so much that we can do. But I don't think enough resources are done, particularly not for the local history. And if our storytellers, our griots, and our elders can come together and tell stories about what happened. I grew up around my grandparents, and much of what I know is because of listening to story. If we reform how we deliver history, instead of it just being a set of dates being presented in a book, I think that we would attract more people to that particular topic, because there's a lot yet undiscovered and a lot yet unknown for the generation. Thank you so much for that engagement there.